Good evening, everyone. Nice to see you all here. I know we have Council President on the line on Zoom. Commissioner Gormley could not join us this evening, and I believe Councilor Payne is on her way. And I am really happy to be hosting us this evening. This is the first of what will now be biannual meetings of the McMinnville City Council and the McMinnville Water and Light Commission. We decided to launch this process by really focusing in on really some basics. We're starting with properties. Which properties does which organization have? How are they utilized? What do we understand about them mutually and individually? What questions do we have? And before we dive in, before I hand it over, I want to say that the product that we have to work off tonight is so cool. It is. I mean, I don't know all of whom was involved in building this tool, but I know it was a collaborative effort. And you helped build the interactive map? I don't know about that, Counselor. It is really amazing, and I look forward to not only using it tonight, but also making it available to the public for future use. I just think it's a wonderful way to move around the city virtually, and so thank you for all of your efforts to bring us to this point. And with that, we'll go right into our land review update, and I'll look to the table in front of us here to start us off. And thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. I will start us off. I'm Ann Pagano, Public Works Director, if you haven't met me before. And I do want to thank Andrew Castro, our GIS specialist, did most of the heavy lift on putting this together, but of course we coordinated with Mac Water and Light staff and John and their GIS tech, so it was definitely a very collaborative effort. So our plan was to walk through this document, and then feel free to interrupt if you'd like at any time, or we could wait till the end and kind of ask questions, and you'll see Susan's going to run it, but you can kind of zoom around and zoom in and out. So we could come back to certain areas and zoom in and get more information on those areas if you'd like. So the first, we're calling them slides. They're kind of like slides, but it's more like a map, if you will. We call it a story map. The first slide here shows a summary of city-owned facilities, buildings, their square footage, and the lot acreage, as well as the McMinnville watershed, which is obviously the largest acreage. Which, yeah, if you zoom out a little bit and then go over to the there you go. The blue there up in the upper left is the watershed area. Okay, and then the next slide, if you will, shows city parks. And here we have a, I also wanted to mention, this is still in progress, kind of drafty. We've made a lot of progress on it, but we'll probably, make some more changes to it after this evening. But most of the tables are pretty accurate, but they are drafts, so that's why I have draft on there. So the city parks, this is a summary of our parks by different types, as well as the green space areas and open space, and the total for all parks, including the green space. Did you want to say anything? Go ahead.
I'm Susan Muir. I'm the Parks and Recreation Director, and as Ann mentioned, this is new technology for us too, so learning how to use it and drive around on it. Hopefully you all can pull it up on your phones and follow along if some of this information is too small. We are in the process of doing a master plan update for our parks, and so part of why this is data gathering effort for us is really to modernize the data that we have. And one of the cool things about this program is if you right-click on the property for a park, you'll see this one we call the Dayton Undeveloped, and it's got the acreage right there. So you just have to click on it. Here's City Park, 16 acres. So really interactive, as the mayor said, so that you can try and kind of figure out space. Quarry Park, the best-known non-park that we have in McMinnville, about 11.9 acres. So it is really an interactive way to move around. And we are using this information to, like I said, better produce data that's accurate as we move from the 1999 PROS plan to the new updated one. We're really taking the opportunity to make sure our nomenclature, our numbers, what we call things are consistent and solid by the time we have an adopted update plan. So that's the parks info.
Okay, the next one is the water reclamation facility, which we are also working on a master plan for, but this shows the wastewater treatment plant and the associated property with that facility. And then, of course, there's the airport, which we are also working on a master plan for, which is going to kick off soon. But yeah, this shows the runways, obviously, and the associated city-owned property in that area, as well as you can see the park there as well. Airport Park is a little green area. West Side walking path.
This is just an example of where we already do work together closely and collaboratively on providing multiple services with the same property. This was the BPA path, now owned by Mac Water and Light, and it is an excellent part of our park system. We hope to continue to grow these types of facilities where we can really capitalize on open space that might be able to be used as recreation as well. So this is one really good example, and there are many. I'm sure John could give many, many good examples of where we partner together, but this was one we wanted to call out and show you an example of.
And then the operations in Mac Water and Light area. You've seen also some space area planning studies that we're working on. We brought to a work session recently, but this shows blue is Mac Water and Light, and then the sort of dark green is other city property, including the operations facility, and then the little green is a Mac Water and Light substation. And then you can see also the hatched area is the area of Joe Dancer Park that we are leasing from the Mac Water and Light. And this slide shows McMinnville Water and Light owned property in the different blue and kind of lighter, darker green. Those are the green are the substations. Did you want to say anything about this? Or I can get this out of there.
So yeah, the green are electric substations. And then if you scroll to the west, you will see our, right there, that is our finished water reservoirs, and then the little blue square is actually another site that we own for a future reservoir as well, water reservoir. So this is our watershed. So it's roughly 6,400 acres. The one piece you see kind of the light colored area to the, I guess to be the west and south is actually owned by the BLM, not by Water and Light. So that's the one piece within our watershed that we do not own. So.
And then this one shows our downtown buildings, including all of them: the Aquatic Center, the CDC, City and Civic Hall, Community Center, Library, Nelson House, the parking garage, and the police station. And the red block is the fire district. And then this slide shows the areas of common interest between the city and McMinnville Water and Light. So the eastern property there, which we're calling the Miller property, that has kind of the big oval on it, has been under consideration for a potential future rec center. And then kind of in the middle there is the existing fuel station at Mac Water and Light, which we've talked about possibly sharing. And then the other area on the far left there is the operations property, which could have some future expansion capabilities for Mac Water and Light. Yep, I think that's everything. So like I said, we can go back to any of those, zoom in, answer questions, have dialogue.
Yeah, let's do that. Why don't we, well, first, Mr. Dietz, is there anything you'd like to generally add on the water and light side of things, especially for the council benefit and benefit of the public that's here today?
A couple things. One is we're looking at a couple of areas of expansion that are not shown on the map. One is to the south off of Highway 18 for future treatment plant and substation. And then we're also looking at the Fox Ridge site for a future fifth reservoir, which would be to the north of the site, but adjacent to the site. And then the third thing that and Ann mentioned a little bit, is the small green box next to Public Works. That is a combined BPA/water and light substation that we are looking at potentially having a future expansion there as well. So that's why we'd be looking at Public Works, the property there.
Thank you. So I think at this time we can go to both the council and the commission jointly and open this up for conversation and questions. Would anybody care to launch? Uncomfortably call on people? It's my favorite thing. No? Oh, thank you. Councilor Peralta.
We have, I think the BPA path is a good example of an area where the city and
Can you speak into your mic?
the BPA path is an example of where the city and Mac Water and Light may have similar maintenance interests, and I'm wondering if there's a way to reduce costs by doing more. I mean, I'm not sure what we're doing right now collaboratively in terms of maintaining things like that, but I wonder if maybe you could speak to that and if there's opportunities there for improving maintenance in some of those corridors as well as reducing costs.
So maybe what I'd start with is probably the map actually doesn't show the newest addition to that, because it actually goes from Baker Creek all the way to Baker Creek Road all the way to Baker Creek now. So if you were looking at that map, you would actually go all the way to the very end of I guess that's the UGB city limits line there, off along Meadows. There's the little green line. So that's actually the transmission corridor. It's 60 feet wide. BPA purchased that and constructed it in 1965. Water and Light purchased that from BPA in 2019. Our crews actually completed the first mile of the rebuild between the Walnut City substation, which is right there on 2nd Street, all the way to the Baker Creek substation, which we expanded last year. And they'll actually start working on the northern part of that next year. So, for us, maintenance on that looks like keeping brush and trees to a minimum height so that they don't interfere with the transmission line. We have added, the poles are a little taller than the original poles. They were 60 and 65 feet. I believe we went to 70 and 75. So there's a little bit more clearance. But one of the things that we're also looking at is the future, possibly adding a fiber onto those poles. Right now, that area is actually a radial area in our fiber network, and so that's one of the things that we're going to look at adding, which would tie in our Walnut City and Baker Creek subs, but would also tie in at Fox Ridge. We also have a site there for fiber, but also the city has infrastructure there as well, and there's actually a cell tower on that site as well. So that they used a different fiber, but there's fiber there too. But really the biggest thing for us is keeping the brush down, mitigating for wildfire. Yeah. Thank you.
I might just add from a Parks and Recreation planning perspective, we're open to any and all opportunities to partner on land that could really be valuable to our community for open space. So looking for all of these opportunities, especially as we go through this master plan update, is critical. So yeah, keeping in close touch with our partners is key for this, for us to have the type of open space system that we want.
Can I,
Please. And then finish Councilor Peralta, and then Chair Tankersley will come to you.
thank you. Susan, one question to you, and this doesn't really relate to water and light, but the park space, or rather the open space that's on Old Sheridan Road, heading out of town, bottom right there, there. In the next master plan, what are you envisioning with that space? I ride my bike by it pretty much every day. It's beautiful, one of the last oak groves we have in town, totally overgrown with underbrush. What are
Yeah.
your thoughts there?
It's a great opportunity, and I think that is one of the pieces of property that I get the most calls on, for people saying, don't we have a trail there? Why don't we have this? It will be a part of the plan for development in the new updated master plan. You're going to see that plan on September 21st, and we'll also talk about priorities there. But my guess is this will stay a relatively natural area with open space, recreation, and potentially educational opportunities.
Like a trail, basically,
Yeah,
through it?
yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Chair Tankersley.
Yeah, John, perhaps you could talk a little bit about what we have. Like, my perception is that area you talked about is a new line area. We just acquired BPA's easement rights, right? We don't own the dirt, do we?
Correct. We just have the easement rights. And it was acquired 2019, like I said earlier, but it's actually about 4.5 miles long. So it actually goes all the way to Highway 47. It goes north of Baker Creek and turns, I believe it's at Donnelly Lane, and then heads directly east, and then abuts basically the city limits. You can see there's a little blue dot right at that blue dot right there. That's actually another future substation site. And that's actually along the transmission main, so the transmission line. So that transmission line actually continues on and goes east to there, from there to highway, essentially a tap point at Highway 47 where we tie into BPA.
This might be a question for Sam, but is it correct that we have an easement to put a power line in there and maintain the power line? We don't necessarily have an easement for recreational use. Is that right?
Correct. Yeah.
And Councilor Geary.
Thank you. Ian, real quick, before I have a couple of questions, just want to make sure I get the nomenclature right. So the current wastewater treatment plant is the wharf, right? The water reclamation facility?
Correct.
Okay. And then the old one, that post-closure at the current public workshop, what should I refer to that as?
We just call it the old wastewater treatment plant.
Oh, okay. Got it. So the old wastewater treatment plant, we had that back to us some amount of time ago, and then I know you guys are cranking away on the current plan. Could you just give us an update on where that is in terms of the thinking of the use for that space?
Well, we've had some conversations with Mac Water and Light about potentially purchasing the property for expansion of their facilities. And we've been looking at options for reclamation of the site. We're still working on that master plan, space planning project, so we will have some recommendations in there for potential mitigation and costs for that. There's some grants out there that could help us pay for mitigating the site, making it buildable or turning it into a park or something like that, but it's pretty much open right now as far as what we're going to do with it long term.
And how has, maybe Mr. Dietz or Chair Tankersley, someone from the commission, have those discussions gone on your end in terms of the viability of that property in terms of expanding? I know that's sort of nestled in a large part of your guys' operations, and so maybe you could sort of pick up the Mac Water and Light piece of that property and usage and interest.
So if you look at where the substation is, that's nope. The green right there, that's where we are looking at expanding that area. That's both a BPA site where they have transmission coming in, and we take delivery at that site from them. But then also, the other thing we've been looking at is potentially using that site for what we would call a spoils area for like vac truck spoils, where we currently have some small ponds that we use and have to clean out on a regular basis. So we generate probably 200 to 300 yards of material a year just from our operations as far as vac spoils, basically excavating.
Those old clarifiers would make great slag pits.
And then also from our water main replacements, we replace the material with essentially rock instead of pull the old material, the soil, and replace it with rock. So those would be potential areas for disposing of that and filling it over a period of time.
Are you satisfied?
With that answer, I have a few more, if I may. And I've followed along you guys' discussions on the Miller property to some extent, but I'm wondering if you could catch us up on where you guys have talked about in terms of use and value and future of that Miller property.
So really, we have just really gotten started on that. So right now, we're working on a potential agreement for, I guess we'd call it an MOU, for the future of that property. And that's pretty much where it's at. So right now, it's about 26 acres, probably roughly 13 to 14 is usable space. But it does connect directly with the park, which is a pretty nice advantage. So.
And from the city's perspective, we have that final MacPac approved report that points us from the community's perspective at two properties, being one of those two being that property, to have discussions with, engaging you guys in to talk about the future rec facility site. So I know that in the areas of common interest, that's a big interest of ours and mine specifically too. So.
And before we go to you, Council President, perhaps we could just walk through really quickly, since we do have so many people in attendance, the process that the commission needs to go through in evaluating that property and its use for its future use period, whether retaining it or not retaining it, because it is a very specified process that we'll need to go through. Mr. Dietz, would you be comfortable walking us through that?
So basically what will have to happen is the commission will have to declare the property surplus first, and then it will have to go through potentially the city council if there's a sale to a third party. If it's something that goes with the city, or the city purchases, then it would be a fairly not a long process, because obviously it's already technically owned by the citizens of the city. So it's just really, it ties into, coming up with the value of the property. Because I know that we have gotten a appraisal on the property, and I think Susan is actually looking at one as well, so. Yeah.
To follow up, if I may. So the genesis of this joint meeting, not the property part, but our bodies talking, was that discussion. We kind of went through the charter, and it was a illuminating experience, and one of the big ones that jumped out to me is sort of never the twain shall meet, right? You guys are a water institution and a light institution, and your water bottle says water and light, right? So it seems to me that the pieces I'm hearing being talked about in these areas of common interest, while the city is one entity, that you guys have sort of multiple hats to juggle or pots to keep separate. How does that work in terms of looking at these properties? When McMinnville Water and Light says they own a property, is there a subcategory of ownership in that?
So that property is actually owned by the water department. So the water department used the funds from the water department actually purchased the property. So any sale or any proceeds from that would actually go back to the water department.
And then would the water department be interested in the other properties, or would those be
That
light?
would probably be the electric department looking at those properties.
Okay.
And maybe potentially some type of joint water electric if we used it for potentially like a, spoils area or something.
And how's water's relationship with light at the moment?
Hey, it's great.
So I want to move to Council President, but I do want to call out that it is specified in our charter that the two funds are kept separate. And so that is a very specific thing. It's not a, why don't we treat it all as one thing? It is specified in our charter that the water funds should be treated separately from the light funds. And so operationally, we do have to operate in that way. Council President.
Councilor Geary's question was, my main question was who owned what property, water and light sidewise? And then I guess this is more of a question for Susan. Would we be retaining a sliver of that property for the dog park, or is that up for discussion? We'd relocate that somewhere and go for a different design than hog chips? Or?
Yeah, we don't need less dog parks in McMinnville. We need more dog parks in McMinnville. So we wouldn't want to decrease our access to an off-leash dedicated area. And that too will be coming out of the Parks Master Plan. I think if there was a specific park like this that later turns out to be better used for something else, we would look at where to put a dog park. The good news is dog parks sometimes fit within other parks, larger parks. We've actually talked about doing pop-up dog parks in, Lower City Park and stuff like that. So, yeah, we would definitely want to keep an area for dogs somewhere around that portion of town.
Okay. Thank you.
Additional questions? Councilor Menke.
And you may have covered this, I apologize, but, well, there's several large circles there. The one on the left is the one that puzzles me. Is this a property that Water and Light's interested in, or is this just?
Yep, that was the area we talked about, the operations property.
Well, that's what I was thinking, and then we got detracted by the transfer station or whatever.
Right, so that's the old wastewater treatment plant on the kind of the northern side, and then the operations is on the southern side.
Okay, that was my understanding, but I just wanted to be sure I got it. Thank you.
Councilor Geary.
One more thing. Has there been any discussion? As Sal alluded to, we have a good history of a sort of shared stewardship of property that could, why can't we make something that serves everyone and both of us at the same time? In that end, and I know we had talked about it, has there been any discussion on sort of a shared ops facility for a public works and what you guys do? There's overlap, but I know there's also disparate missions and being courteous towards those. Has that been a discussion? Will we need those final plans before we have that discussion? Is that being used as input to both those discussions, and then we'll have that discussion?
Yeah, we talked about this actually at the work session for the space planning study that we're doing right now. That was definitely considered, and we talked about it with Mac Water and Light. And it was determined that our operations are so different from what they're doing that it just didn't make sense just logistically to combine into either of our spaces. I don't know if you have anything more to add.
Probably the biggest thing for us is, the amount of space that we use for storage of materials. So if you look at our site, probably, you see the building, the warehouse, the pole shed back there, probably just what we have developed right now, probably 40% of the site is actually just material storage, because if you go behind the pole shed, that is actually where we store all of the poles, different sizes, lots of different material back there. And then the other part is up front of the warehouse area, we actually have what we call an oil transformer storage area, which has secondary containment for oil. So all of that area we try to keep off limits from anybody out there, because you knock one of those over and we've got a pretty good significant cleanup to happen. So those areas we try to keep off limits and minimize the activity around those areas. And then the other thing I would add is we also store a lot of conductor in those areas that are on large reels. So we try to keep people out of those areas, because we don't want anybody stealing that, because it's mostly aluminum, a little bit of copper, but there's a lot of value in those things. And that's probably something else I would add is the value of those materials. Pre-pandemic, we probably had on hand probably somewhere between $800,000 and $1 million in inventory. Today, it's more than double that because of the issues with getting the material. And so it's becoming even more critical for us that we're probably, our facility master plan calls for over time to actually double the size of our warehouse, just to be able to store the materials that we have. So our space is going to actually grow, especially the undercover space.
And just for the benefit of the council, supplies have been skyrocketing and shortages like we see everywhere else, and that includes things related to transmission, that includes power poles, and one of the steps the commission has taken has been to pre-authorize purchasing so that the utility as a whole can be better equipped going into the future, because if we were ordering more on demand, we would not have what we needed in order to keep up with our system currently.
So some of the materials that we purchase on an ongoing basis have gone up 300% since 2020. And transformers are now out over 2 years if we wanted to get a transformer. What Remy's talking about is we actually have an agreement with a transformer manufacturer for allocated slots, production slots, that we have basically reserved for us. And so that's one of the things that we've been a little fortunate on. We have not had the issues that other utilities have had about delaying projects, especially customer projects. And so right now what we're actually doing is we're actually ordering material for next year's construction season.
Councilor Chenoweth.
Probably should know this, but I don't. This section that says lease, am I understanding this picture correctly?
I don't see the words lease, but maybe that's...
Yeah, the hashing is the area of Joe Dancer Park that we lease from Mac Water and Light.
Okay, so Mac Water and Light owns it and the city is leasing it.
Correct. And so that was done back in the early 1990s.
And our current lease rate?
Not much. I think the city paid...
Less than $1 a year?
The city paid water and light up front, and so there's no ongoing cost.
Chair?
As I recall, that was, it was a site the city needed to mitigate some wetlands that they were, from some other project they had. And so it just seemed easier for the city to pay us. We weren't, there'd be problems dividing it, so rather than dividing it, the city would just pay us, and they'd pay the lease up front, and then there's just a small lease payment from now on. So it was an upfront payment, and then a small payment every year after that.
Councilor Gary?
Yeah, thank you. From a city perspective on our property, not just on the areas of common interest, but where our property will or could become an area of common interest. I know going through that MACPAC process where we spent time looking for the new rec facility and analyzing our property and other people's property, we came across a couple of times of we would need to put a pin in sort of the legal morass of property we already own and grant money and deed money and other things that we've taken on to get that park done or to ensure that it can be a park or an open space for a long time. Is any of that, have we done that analysis to any level on sort of our areas of common interest or other areas, or would that just be something we would need to wade through as we go?
Yes. I think it would be, part of that would be, we would evaluate that as part of the investigation on the history of the property and the appraisal and that sort of stuff to see if there's any restrictions on it. Just so everybody knows that what we referred to the MACPAC process was a 2-year community process to talk about potentially building one new building that would replace the community center and the aquatic center, and this property, what we call the Miller property, was one of 2 recommended by that group back in the end of 2021, I believe. And through that, one of the things that MACPAC looked at was they didn't want to lose any parkland. And so that helped us narrow down the sites a little bit. However, Wortman Park was on the list. Wortman Park and City Park have received federal funding. When you get a grant from some of these federal funding agencies, you have to put a deed restriction on the property that prohibits the conversion of any of that property from recreation to another use. That means that's a little bit more complicated process. There's more regulations on it. We have to get federal approval to convert it from open space to a building space. So I don't know anything about any restrictions on the Miller property, but I would assume not, just because it's not developed with anything.
We paid for it with water funds. We did not have any grants or any federal dollars for that.
Council President.
The north side of the property there from the Joe Dancer roundabouts, has there been any talk of possible use for a lease agreement for park usage, or does Water and Light have any master plan ideas for that north hillside? It seems fairly walkable from downtown if there is walkable access from 5th Street, and geographically it seems like it would be a natural amphitheater.
Yeah, so there is some, we are looking at the piece directly to south of our current facility as an expansion area. There's probably about an acre to an acre and a half of flat ground right there. And then the thing that we would have to look at on the westerly part of the property is there is some transmission easements for the transmission line. We have a transmission line that runs through there, and that feeds our, basically the south end of what we call the 115 kV loop. So we have a loop around town, so we can feed town from either side of that. So that would have to be looked at. And we would want to retain that easement on that property because of that line. We're also looking at part of that, rebuilding that line as well, or at least that portion of the line, more for resiliency, because we have some large guy wires, down guys on that line that produce risks to potentially failure. And so we'll be looking at basically realigning the line to eliminate those risks. And so we've been doing that on a number of our transmission lines. 2nd Street is an example of that, where we moved the line from the south side of the road to the north side, put steel poles in, so we eliminated those issues with the down guys. If a car or anything goes into them, that's going to be a significant, outage to the transmission system.
Thank you.
And if I could just add, at the time that the MacPac group was looking at the Miller property, one thing that we didn't have time to do is look at the planning of that property in conjunction with the entire Joe Dancer Park. So we were really looking at it in terms of, could the concept plan that MacPac came up with fit in that, basically in the purple circle there. But I would certainly hope if that site moves forward, we would be able to take a better comprehensive look about how it relates to the Joe Dancer Park and any other potential opportunities around there. We were just really focused on size, would it fit? But there's a ton of opportunity to connect with other open space amenities over there.
Well, one more thing.
Please.
John, did I hear you say, went back about that Miller property, an MOU was in place to advance discussions, or?
No, we're looking at one right now.
Oh, okay. Okay. Similar to our other process that we've done, okay.
Just to, again, bring everybody up to speed, when these two properties became the two alternatives that were a recommendation from MacPac, the other piece of property owned by Linfield University, we entered into a memorandum of understanding with them to start the conversations about potentially locating it there. That was a 6-month agreement. It expired, and Linfield chose not to renew it because they were doing some strategic planning. However, we've taken that basic legal concept and moved it around and changed it a little bit to see if it would work for us to consider on this.
As long as we're on these properties, and especially because we do have an audience here today, do you want to touch back a little bit on our sinkhole and kind of generally where it is and how that's affected? Because I think we have a sinkhole on Water and Light property.
I don't know exactly where it is. Do you, John?
Yeah, if you were to go directly south from the building and just go down into that hatched area, it's about right in that area. And that was I believe it was a old sewer outfall from the old wastewater plant.
Yeah, that's right.
So
It's been in need of repair for a while, and we just haven't had funding, and it's there. but we do need to fix it as soon as possible.
Yeah, and when you say it's needed repair for a while, it's an old sewer line that's made of brick, correct?
Is that right? Yeah.
So it's been in need of repair for decades? Century? Okay.
So we have talked to wastewater about maybe rerouting that, so instead of going out to the river that way, it would go through the creek that's between the water and light property and the existing operations, city operations property, which would shorten it significantly.
Counselor Chenoweth?
So in that case, repair would be abandonment and fill? And what are we talking about cost-wise?
That I don't know. I don't know.
We haven't looked at that yet.
Okay.
Commissioners, any additional questions? I think the only thing, other thing I would love to touch upon is maybe just a little bit more of that history. Councilor Chenoweth, you said earlier, you said maybe I should know this and I don't. Well, we have only just decided to have a joint onboarding and training as people join the commission and the council. So I think it's very natural for us actually not to, there's no expectation that you would know all of the histories of the organizations or what properties they own, et cetera. And so maybe we could just touch back a little bit on, we've focused a lot on this one property, or on kind of on these two properties, but there's been a lot of collaboration between the two organizations. And Chair, I don't know if you would like to expand on that, or if not staff, but to kind of touch on the multiple collaborations between the two organizations.
Sure. Are we talking about the park area?
Parks and-
Is it park area?
Yeah.
Yes. What happened there was the Water and Light purchased the portion of it to the kind of in the east side of it there of Dancer Park. There was the part that's east of the road that goes through it. We purchased that, and then I believe, John, or Sam, we gave the city an easement or a right to put their road in there, right?
Remember exactly. I don't remember exactly. I think that's part of the lease part.
Yeah, no, I was on the.
Yeah, the road is within the lease part of the property.
Yeah, and then the city had, like we talked about earlier real briefly, the city had a problem. They needed a place to mitigate wetlands, and
Right.
the crosshatched area was a good one to do that, and so we made a deal with that. The city has always paid us for it. Our former attorney, Dave Hageberg, would only probably tell the commission once every 2 months that we had to keep the funds separate, and so we did that. But we tried to be cooperative and work together on this.
And I believe we purchased a number of the parks and then did transactions with the city for, I think, 2 or 3 of the parks, right, Sam?
I'm just going to say that into the mic for the benefit of the audience and everybody, which was that, or yes, if you would, thank you.
So if you look at, so originally Joe Dancer was, I call it the McDaniel property. It was purchased with water and light funds back, I believe, in the early 1980s. And then the city almost immediately repaid those funds. So it was just really a financing. A similar thing happened with Discovery Meadows. Water and Light financed that for the city, and those funds also were repaid. So the funds were kept whole, the water and electric funds were kept whole. And there was a similar arrangement made with Tice Park. And these all occurred in excess of 20 or 30 years ago. But those are all transactions that happened quite quickly. I mean, within the matter of a year or two when the property transactions, it was just a matter of really, I think, cash flow. The city didn't have cash flow, and so it was water and electric funds were tapped for essentially what was an interfund loan. So kind of a different characteristic of time, I think.
And Sam, as I recall, there was usually an interest component too, I think.
I think there was, and I think as I remember for Discovery Meadows, there was specifically, I think there was an interest component in sort of a, what happens if there's an agreement, what happens if the city doesn't make the payment. Then I think in that case, the property would have just converted to the water and electric department.
So I think being relatively new to this, it's similar maybe to what the council just did with the ARPA funds with the wastewater fund. Sort of the same concept, and that fund is getting interest as well.
Any additional questions, Councilor Chenoweth?
Well, not really a question, but a comment. I guess in looking at this, I never realized Joe Dancer wasn't even in the city limits.
Yeah, parts of it are not.
I really do appreciate this holistic map that was put together, and especially that it includes the watershed. If you scroll out, I think I think most councilors or all councilors, I believe, have been on the watershed tour at this point. But it's a wonderful opportunity to go up and see our expansive watershed that has been exceptionally well cared for, and that brings us beautiful, the best water in the state of Oregon on a daily basis.
Yeah, so I'd probably comment on that as well. So we actually had a fire about 3/4 of a mile from our watershed just a couple weeks ago. I think it was maybe 3. It's called the ball bearing fire. And that fire triggered us to actually start mobilizing some of our equipment up to the watershed. We have a dozer up there, so we have a dump truck. We were getting ready to move that equipment to help assist in that fire. We also have our own fire truck, our own brush truck that we keep up there as well. And our water treatment plant operators are trained every year on fire operations. So they will be the first responders up there if there is a fire.
And also, we sell timber, and the logging contractors for the buyers are required to have their own fire suppression equipment and crews as well.
And in addition to that, the logging that we did this last year, we specifically logged along the power lines so that we were both logging and creating protection against fire at the same time.
So BPA has a 230,000 volt line that runs on the northeast side of our watershed, and then actually cuts through our watershed, and so we logged both sides of that. And actually we did the second logging this year was to finish that. And so what we're going to do is we'll do a shorter rotation in that area so that we limit the height of the trees in that area so that we don't have any potential conflicts with that line in our timber.
These are trees that were outside of the Bonneville easement that they're responsible to keep down. And so the problem was our trees were so big they fall over. So now we told our forester we want to harvest those trees before they get that big in the future. So those might be harvested in 40 years rather than 80 years next time.
Council.
And so, with all the wildfire issues going on, we actually last year developed a wildfire mitigation plan that we update annually, and we actually have one for both the watershed and the electric system. So those are updated annually.
What's the size of the acreage that BLM owns in the middle of our watershed, and what's the average age of trees? Like, how soon do you think they're going to log that?
I'm not sure. We'd have to ask our forester. I think that's somewhere between around 160 acres, maybe 200 acres, roughly in that square. We've done trades with BLM in the past for potential, for trading property back and forth.
And
with
even
BLM.
though it is BLM, it is landlocked by us, so it's closed for access?
Well, that's something we're always looking at because we're not sure yet, but we potentially think that the fire up there was started by homeless in that area. There was actually a large homeless camp near that area. So, And, BLM technically have to have public access, but since they have to cross us, a lot of times we tell them no and we keep the gates closed.
Okay, and I would say just for the record that 60 to 70% of wildfires in the Coast Range are started by target shooters.
And there's a lot of target shooting that goes
Like
on.
target shooters because you're sighting in your rifle ahead of a hunting season. You don't realize how dry it is. You're making impact. I'm a gun owner, strong Second Amendment guy, but at the end of the day, you have live ammunition that creates something warm and something smolders. You don't even know that it's on fire. Some evening winds come through, and that's what sparks up most wildland fires in the state of Oregon.
So, and I would also add that our watershed is off limits to the public, and we do prosecute. Over the last probably 5 years, we've prosecuted close to 24 people for trespassing, because human activity is the #1 cause of water quality issues. So there's no access to the watershed at all.
And you guys can stop me if I'm getting too much in the weeds or the trees here, but we actually have 2 watersheds in the sense of what they feed. We have one watershed that's around our smaller reservoir, Haskins, that you remember seeing from the tours. That watershed, we own almost all of the land. I think there's a 40-acre piece that somebody else owns up on the rim, but basically that water all goes through ours. For the larger reservoir, McGuire, there's a lot of water that flows in there that goes across either private timber companies or BLM. And we have, since I've been on the commission, we acquired one big chunk from a local owner, and then we've acquired some other pieces kind of up, I guess, what direction would that be? South, I guess. No, west, up basically where the Nestucca starts.
So it'd be down to the south, the headwaters would be down to the south where that little piece is. And then the Nestucca flows through, and McGuire is in that area to the east of the open area is McGuire. And then if you scroll down, basically the road follows the river. This follows the Nestucca. You see that little white area through there? That's the road, and you can see where we have a little bit of watershed that goes outside and kind of follows the Nestucca. And then, like Tom was saying, that's the one watershed, and then the other watershed is the Haskins watershed, which is to the east of that.
Thank you. Well, are there additional questions or comments at this time? If not, Councilor Geary?
I was just going to ask a little bit more about the Fox Ridge area and the growth and plans and management for both the power and the facilities you have there, as well as how that conversation is going with the housing and the area master plan out there, as well as that sort of service above the elevation level challenge and where that discussion's at in terms of what are we doing? Are we doing enough on property to help out there to make sure that that land comes together and is high value for the future housing of the city?
You go for it.
Okay, so I think if I remember right, there's about 13 acres at that site. We have 4 reservoirs, 22 million gallons of finished water. If you would look the little bulb out to the north, that's our transmission lines, basically hit in that area, and they go all the way up to essentially the watershed. So there's about 10 miles, and there's 2 transmission lines, a 24 and a 16. What we're looking at is either additional easements or purchasing the property to the north and the east that we could put a 5th reservoir. That would be what we call Reservoir 5. So currently the 4 reservoirs, there's a 10 million gallon reservoir, a 7 million gallon reservoir, and 2 smaller reservoirs that I think, if I remember right, are about 5 million gallons combined. And that little blue piece you see to the west, that was purchased for a reservoir for what we call Zone 2, which is a higher pressure zone. So basically, our Zone 1 is, was it 272 elevation? 272 elevation. So basically, anything above 272, we cannot serve because the pressure is not high enough. And so what we did is we went back and looked at that. So we actually, back in 1996, built the pump station for this. So the pump station is in place. What's not in place are the pumps for serving Zone 2. And so when we went back and looked at this last year, we looked at it, and one of the things that we looked at is if we continue to rebuild our transmission main and upgrade our 16 to a 36, we only need to use that pump station about 5% of the time in that higher zone. So one of the things we've been looking at is how we can replace that line over time. But then the other piece of that is, typically the way it works, the developer would pay those costs for installing the pumps for that area. And so if I remember right, there's roughly 700 lots potentially up there.
I don't think it's that many.
Well, I think it is if you, not just the Cower property, but all the property up there, because Zone 2 continues way to the southwest too, because the way the property lays, so there's other areas up there.
Mayor,
Yes.
Community Development Director Richards has her hand up. She may be able
Oh,
to add some
great.
more to the conversation.
Oh, yes, thank you. I'm sorry, I didn't have Zoom open. Community Development Director Richards, please.
Thank you, Mayor. Actually, I didn't have the numbers for the number of lots served by Zone 2. I can look that up really quickly for you if there's interest. I was just going to follow up after John to talk about the Fox Ridge Road area planning process and the housing discussion associated with that.
So right now, we've actually completed all the engineering for the installation of the pump station, and it's ready to be essentially funded by a developer. So that's really where it's at.
Thank you. And why don't we let Community Development Director Richards finish answering Councilor Geary's question, and then we'll go to you, Council President.
Yeah, so the Fox Ridge Road area plan, we actually are coming to you with a presentation on where we're at with that on October 10th, I believe, in work session. But Sam Justice has been on the Project Advisory Committee representing McMinnville Water and Light. The Project Advisory Committee has been doing an excellent job of engaging the public, collecting comments, and thinking really thoughtfully about how to best position that area to serve the community's needs, both in terms of housing, a variety of different types of housing, high density housing and lower density housing, as well as parks and open space. So you should see their preferred concept plan here in just a couple of weeks.
John, you mentioned the upgrade from 16 inches to 36. How long is that transmission line, and how many feet do we have left to go, and what's the timeline on that?
So the transmission line's about 10 miles. It was 50, I think it's around 54,000 feet. We've done 2 of the 8 phases. And the challenge is the cost of materials. So when we originally put that in our master plan in 2011, it was $24 million to do the whole project. Now, after we've completed 2 phases, it's $76 million. So what we're looking at is, I think it's Stantec Engineering is actually looking at doing the alignment study, and I think they're just about done with that. Correct? So they're finished with the alignment study, and we've actually have 100% plans for phase 3, and then we are working on phase 4. And the biggest challenge, the longest thing that will take us is getting easements, because we have a number of property owners to acquire easements from. And right now we're working with, I think, 5 different property owners to acquire easements. And so once we do that, then we'll start phase 3. And then once we get phase 3 done, we'll go right into phase 4. So what we're hoping to do is have shovel-ready projects. If we can get grants, then we could actually pull the trigger on those phases as we go. But it's going to be probably 15 to 20 years.
Gotcha. Okay, thank you.
All right, wonderful. Well, thank you. I think for a very first joint session of the McMinnville City Council and McMinnville Water and Light Commission, this was great. There was a lot of touches on emergency management, and when we are looking forward in about 6 months to our second joint meeting, I think that's the direction we'll be pointing as a topic for conversation. It was something that in the joint work that we did was called out as a priority for both organizations, and so that is where we will go next. Thank you again so much, all of you, for the preparation for this and this really incredible interactive map that will be available for the public as well to use and to look around and understand how our properties are used. For those in the audience that are here for the regular council meeting, we'll start that at 7 p.m. We have to notice our meetings and give a specific start time, so even though we're concluding this meeting early, we won't be able to start that meeting early. We'll take a break until 7 o'clock. And then just so you know, the order of operations will be that we'll call the meeting to order and have a roll call. We'll have the Pledge of Allegiance. We have one proclamation this evening. And we have some wonderful ceremony of a new police sergeant swearing in. At that point, we'll go to comments from community members. After that, we will go to advice and information items from councilors, including I had let the community know that I was planning on releasing or talking to this evening about some things, so that's when that will happen. And then after that, we'll go into the regular business meeting section of the meeting, so just everybody has a clear understanding and can anticipate what will be coming out here over the next bit of time. Would our city recorder, Claudia Cisneros, like to say something before we close?
Yes, just wanted to state for the record that we did receive a lot of public comment that went directly for City Council and MAC Water and Light, and I just want to state that those will be entered into the record, and both bodies have received those public comments. Some of those names were Lisa Macy Baker, Jasoon Lee and Jay Nelson, Sandra Stokes, Andrew Jones, Diane Hageberg, Shea, Leah McClade, and Sinel Harney. So all those will be entered into the record and made public tomorrow.
Great. Thank you so much. And the joint session is adjourned at 6:31 p.m. Thank you. Sounds good.
It doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Not the guy on the right, the other guy? He's your guy?
He doesn't, I hit the deer, he showed, doesn't matter, he's always the one that puts on the place. Like, I never, it's like, if I need, they're the one who shows up.
Grab their seats. No jokes. No jokes on that.
Hold on to your bird. So.
Well, when okay, that'd be interesting.
Good evening and welcome to welcome puppy dog. Very cute. Welcome to the September 12th, 2023 regular meeting of the McMinnville City Council. I would like to call the meeting to order and ask Claudia Cisneros, our city recorder, to do a roll call.
Counselor Geary,
Good evening.
Counselor Minke,
Present.
Counselor Chenoweth,
Present.
Counselor Payne, here. Counselor Peralta,
Here.
Council President Garvin,
Here.
and Mayor Drabkin.
Here. Thank you. May I ask our Chief of Police to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance?
Pledge allegiance to the flag
Of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you, Chief. Thank you, everyone, for being here tonight. We're going to start with a proclamation this evening. And this evening, we are designating September 15th to October 15th as LatinX Heritage Month. Whereas National LatinX Heritage Month celebrates the Latinx community and highlights its countless achievements, and whereas the observation began in 1968 as Hispanics Heritage Week under President Lyndon B. Johnson and was enacted into federal law on August 17, 1988, calling upon the people of the United States to observe this time with ceremonies, activities, and programs. And whereas many Latinx Americans trace their roots to the cultures of indigenous peoples of the Americas, including the Arawaks, the Aztecs, the Incas, the Maya, the Taínos, and some trace their roots to ancestors from Spain, Mexico, the Caribbean, Central and South America, and Africa. And whereas September 15th to October 15th is recognized as National Hispanic Heritage Month, a time to honor and celebrate the invaluable ways Latinxes contribute to McMinnville's common goals to celebrate a diverse Latinx culture and to work toward a stronger and more inclusive society for all. And whereas the 15th of September is significant as a starting date for Latinx Heritage Month because it is the anniversary of independence from Spain for Costa Rica, El Salvador, Guatemala, Honduras, and Nicaragua, Mexico and Chile celebrate their independence on September 16th and 18th, respectively. And whereas Latinxes are a significant part of the McMinnville's population and influence and fabric of our community, with contributions to McMinnville's arts, businesses, restaurants, civic leadership, education, and overall culture. And now, therefore, I, Remy Drabkin, Mayor of the City of McMinnville, do hereby proclaim the period between September 15th and October 15th, 2023, as Latinx Heritage Month. In witness whereof, I have hereunto set my hand this 12th day of September in the year of 2023. And this evening, I would like to welcome up our Chief of Police, Matt Scales. Tonight, we are doing something new at council, and I'm very happy to be doing this. We will be doing a swearing-in ceremony for our new officers. Thank you, Chief.
Thank you very much. Sorry about the weird kind of configuration, but so my back will be to some, sorry. But historically, when we've sworn people in as new officers, we've done it in a private ceremony over at the police department. And candidly, when we promoted those that are going into the rank of corporal or sergeant, we would do basically no ceremony. I think it's right and the right time to start celebrating these sort of major career milestones in front of our city and our city council and mayor. So tonight, it will be our first, I hope, of many promotional ceremonies. And what it will entail is we will have the three that are being promoted tonight. They will come up. I will give them an oath of office, and then we're going to have their significant other spouses pin their badges on them, and then we'll conclude. But so I'd like to ask Greg Park, come on up. I'd like to ask Brett Rudolph and Matt Peters to also come up. So over the last of the probably 4 months, we had a very competitive process, and these three fine individuals are, I'm proud to say, our newest sergeants for the city. This is a major career milestone, and candidly, I think it's the best position for the entire city as a police officer. You get to affect change at a super granular line level, and you also get to chart the paths of those that are going to be working for you. And we've had lots of conversations about what I expect from sergeants, and these are probably three of the finest individuals we promoted in a very long time. So as we go through this, please, you can take pictures, and obviously I want you all to enjoy this moment. It's a very significant moment for us. So I'll ask all of you to raise your right hand and repeat after me. I state your name. Do solemnly swear that I will uphold the law and support the Constitution of the United States and the state of Oregon, and that I will abide by the Law Enforcement Code of Ethics and the rules and regulations of the McMinnville Police Department, while faithfully performing my duties as a sergeant for the city of McMinnville, Oregon. Congratulations. Congratulations. Yeah, super excited for these folks. We're going to do individual badge pinnings, and it's going to be super quick again. And I want to thank some of the people that are actually past employees of MAC that took the time to come out here. Appreciate you, Eric. So we'll have Marcy Peters. She's super excited for this, I know. You will be pinning Matt with, he's now call sign Max 6. Stephanie. Brett's wife, Stephanie's going to be pinning Brett's. He is now MAC 9. And Emily Park will be pinning Greg with my old number, MAC 10. Congratulations. So lastly, as we go, I say to you all, the three of you, I am super proud. I get emotional because you guys are rock stars, and you're the type of people we need in leadership positions within the city of Mac, and specifically the PD. So congratulations. Once again, everybody, give me a hand.
Thank you, gentlemen, for your service. We will now move to comments from community members. Any interested audience members are invited to provide comments, and any comment provided that requires some sort of follow-up will be assigned to a staff member. Anyone may speak on any topic other than a matter in litigation, a quasi-judicial land use matter, or a matter scheduled for public hearing today or at some future date. Comments will be limited to 3 minutes per person for a total of 30 minutes. If you wish to speak, and you're on Zoom, please use the raise your hand function. And once your turn is up, we'll announce your name and unmute your mic, or you may send a chat directly to our city recorder, Claudia Cisneros, and we will announce you. We are doing a little bit of change in procedure tonight. Typically, we ask you to state your name and address for the record. We're just asking you to state your name and the city that you live in for the record. Our city recorder will still be collecting addresses so that we can follow up if pertinent. And with that, do we have anybody signed up for public comment this evening?
Yes, and I want to start first with stating that for the record, we received several public comments throughout the weekend. We did receive some for the work session topic, and I just want to state those for the record in case we have any of those people here for this regular meeting. We received comments from Lisa Macy Baker, Jasoon Lee and Jay Nelson, Sandra Stokes, Andrew Jones, Diane Hageberg Shea, Leah McClade, Sinel Harney, and then for this regular meeting, we received additional comments from Kim Morris on behalf of McMinnville Community Task Force, Jill Sorensen, Emma Campbell, and Susan Nelson. The first person that signed up is Susan Nelson.
Thank you. Welcome. Yes, if you'll please join us. Yeah, and what you'll see, there's a timer on the screen, and as you, I'll ask you to again state your name and the city you live in for the record, and we'll begin.
Okay. Good evening, Mayor Drabkin and city councilors.
Could you state your name and, yes, oh, sorry.
Pardon.
Thank
My
you.
name is Susan Nelson, and I own my home here at 411 Southwest Cedarwood Avenue in McMinnville. I'd like to share an experience my daughter had while she was at the McMinnville City Park with my 2 young grandchildren. While watching my grandchildren play, my daughter was startled by a loud noise coming from the public restroom. She quickly turned to see a young man storm out of the restroom and aggressively make his way towards her. He stopped at the playground, looked at the children playing, and then acted as if he were pulling out a shotgun. He stared at each child before pointing his imaginary gun and pretending to shoot them. My daughter turned to look at the parents of the other children and was met with looks of shock and fear. Immediately, everyone grabbed their children and left the park. That's our city park. This experience is one of many we have recently seen while out and about in McMinnville. We have spoken with several McMinnville families who are hesitant to take their kids to the city park. We don't feel safe. A park is a place where families should be able to relax and have fun. I see people walking down McMinnville streets who are clearly unwell. Whether it's mental illness or drugs or both, it's obvious that these people are in desperate need of help. I'm also concerned about the increase in campers I see parked around the perimeters of our public schools. We don't know who these campers are, which makes it unsettling to know they are within close proximity to our children. Our children are our greatest assets. Keeping them safe should be our top priority. McMinnville is a great town, full of amazing people. We love our children and we care deeply for each other. There is no love in standing by while our children's safety is at risk. There is no love in standing by while our fellow humans are ravaged by addiction and tormented by mental illness. Mayor Drabkin and council members, I implore you to put the safety of our children at the very top of your priority list. Our schools and public parks are places where families should feel safe. I encourage you to support the people and organizations that are working hard in our community to find real solutions to the issues of homelessness, addiction, and the mental health crisis. I thank you for your time, for the service you give to our community, and for this opportunity to speak to you.
Thank you very much. Do we have anyone else signed up for public comment?
Yes, next we have Kim Morris.
Good evening. Thank you for being here. I know you know the drill, but please state your name and the city you live in for the record.
My name is Kim Morris, and I live in McMinnville. And I'm just here because the McMinnville Community Task Force submitted a letter on the 17th, or I think the 19th of July. And I just think there might be some misunderstanding of what we're asking for, and I wanted to come, make sure you understood what we were, because I don't want you to misunderstand what we're asking. So we had asked for safe zones around schools. I think we all know that there is concern, specifically, probably the most noticeable is around Patton Middle School, and the kids that have to walk to school by some transients, and I do separate homeless from transients, and it's concerning. And so we need to figure out what we can do to help these kids make sure they get to school and make sure they get to school safely. So we asked for safe zones, which would just be an addition to an already current ordinance on the books, where you can't camp in residential zones, you can't camp in the urban renewal, you also can't camp within a certain distance. We've asked for 1,500 feet at this time from a school. So it's just an addition to an ordinance. I think there's also concern that there is already a 72-hour ordinance that's by the state. Not all that in a residential zone that you can't camp. Just please keep in mind that not all schools and not all of the school properties are aligned by residential zones. There are commercial zones around these schools as well. So I guess I'm here to ask you to work with the school district. That's probably the best place to work with if you don't want to work with us, and we understand. We're only here for the benefit of the children and the community. There are concerns from parents, there's concerns from us. I go every morning and watch the kids go to school at Patton and go at the Adams campus to make sure they get there okay. I'm just asking you to think about it and understand we're not asking for yellow lines, we're not asking for signage, we're asking for a change in the ordinance, and that hopefully, like Joe Dancer Park, when that change was made, temporary signs were put up to explain what the ordinance is, and that, believe it, and I think you all saw, the transients and vagrants, they obey it. They've obeyed it for the most part. So a simple change, it hopefully would make that work for us, for the families, for the children, for the school. I just ask you to think about it. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll ask everybody, thank you. I'll ask the audience to refrain from applause or booing, thank you. Can we have the next person signed up for public comment?
Yes, can we do Shannon Brooks?
Hello, my name is Shannon Brooks, and I live in McMinnville.
Thank you. Welcome.
Thank you. I live right next to Thompson Park, which is off of Morgan Lane. My backyard actually backs up to the covered table area. I see a lot of activity over there, but unfortunately I don't see all of it. I'm part of a neighborhood watch group that we started about 5 or 6 years ago. It's called Thompson Park Neighborhood Watch, and the neighbors, are very active in helping the park stay clean and safe. One thing I've noticed, I've lived there for 17 years. One thing I've noticed is that the park patrol or cleaning crew come out. They very rarely walk the perimeter of the park and look for damage, graffiti, unsafe objects, etc. They empty the garbage, they maybe clean the bathroom, and then they're on their way. I have seen security over there at night, and they mostly just shine the flashlight around the park, but don't actually walk around the park to look for anything out of place or abnormal. How are they checking for areas of concern if they aren't actually checking the areas? How is this keeping the parks clean and safe for our children? I go over there to that park with my grandson often. I have seen graffiti on the tables or play equipment for several weeks, but yet the surrounding neighbors who have had their fences graffitied on are given a 10-day notice to clean up their fence. Is the city not held to the same rule for graffiti and parks that the homeowners are? What kind of example is the Parks Department setting in this kind of situation? What kind of message is that sending to the homeowners who have no control or knowledge that the back of their fence has even been graffitied on? I want to share a story that I witnessed personally. A few weeks ago, during the bad heat wave, I was in my backyard with my grandson. I saw a man in his late 40s to 50s laying on the grass in the direct heat. I asked him several times if he was okay and if he needed help. After about 5 minutes, he answered me and he said no. I then gave him a couple of water bottles, but I did not want to approach him as I did not know him and I had my 19-month-old grandson with me. About an hour later, he had not moved from the spot, and it was apparently close to 100 degrees out there. So I called non-emergency to come do a welfare check. She asked me several questions, took my name, said she'd have somebody come and check. After 4 hours, no one had came to check on him. He got up, walked away, and left the park. I don't know whatever happened with him. I have seen him around town a couple of times, but 4 hours in the direct heat could have really harmed him, especially if he had some medical conditions. So I ask you, do you care about all citizens or just some? We are told to call in everything we see or hear at the park, which most of us do. But what good does that do when no one comes out to check on anything, or even check things when they are patrolling the area? We report graffiti, vandalism, and other concerns, but don't get proper feedback.
Thank you, and your time has lapsed if you'll conclude your thoughts.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. The next person, if the audience would please refrain from applause or booing during the proceedings, we'd appreciate it. Thank you. Next person?
That's everyone that signed up.
Okay, is anybody else in the audience like to provide public comment this evening? Would anybody on Zoom like to provide public comment this evening? If so, you can raise your hand or send a chat directly to our city recorder. And is there anyone on the phone?
No one's on the phone.
All right, thank you very much. Next, we'll be going to advice and information, first from council and then department heads. I'm going to go in a different order tonight. I'm going to start, and Claudia, if you could put the map up on the screen, I would appreciate it. So, as many of you have commented on tonight, there's been a lot of information circulated in the community recently. I certainly have had countless conversations about our prohibited camping ordinances and what we are doing, what we aren't doing. And so I wanted to add a little bit of clarity, visual clarity to that. So if you can see on this map, all of the green squares are all of our school district properties. So Councilor Geary, do you mind kind of pointing some of them out since you're nearby there? And then the associated colors, whoop. Thank you. And then the associated colors around them show the zoning, and there's a zoning key on the side there. And then in the bottom left of the screen, we have a feet scale. And so if you look at the majority of those properties, they are completely surrounded by residential and far beyond 1,500 feet, 3,000 feet, 6,000 feet, or more until there's a zone where something would be allowed. Now, as mentioned in public comment, there are a couple areas that border some commercial or some industrial. And we know that in a couple of these areas, we tend to have people violating our current ordinance. Specifically, obviously, we've called these out repeatedly in community conversations. Clearly, the area on McDaniel Lane, north of the school, and Councilor Gary, if you don't mind again, or Councilor Chenoweth pointing those out. And
Chris, you could point out Sue Buell on the bottom. Yeah, exactly.
so we have issues in these areas, and the issues are related not only to the zoning, but beyond the zoning, we also have time, place, and manner restrictions in place, which means even when somebody is allowed to overnight in one of these commercial zones, they still have to be gone by 6:30 in the morning. So when you see these encampments, our current ordinance is being violated. They're already breaking the law. We have a full-time officer assigned to that and a cadet assigned to that as well. As was also mentioned and has been talked about a lot, our enforcement process is mandated by the state. It's a 72-hour enforcement process on camping. So as I've had this conversation many, many, many times, and I kept coming back to the enforcement part of it, and that we, despite being accused of not enforcing our laws, this is actually what full enforcement looks like. As I focused in on those areas, there's something that's, very evident with these smaller areas that that's very different than other areas where people are overnighting legally, which is that we're seeing a lot of drug use. And I think you all know, but perhaps you don't, that public drug use is currently legal, and that's not a McMinnville choice. That was a voter-approved ballot measure. And so that's, to me, the enforcement that we need to be able to change. If it's not accurate what you said, that we simply changed an ordinance with the park. Actually, we didn't change an ordinance at all. We changed an administrative rule. Changing an ordinance is a much different, much more lengthy process, and as you can see on the map, is not applicable to most areas. There are these other issues that we've discussed, but we want to point our spear at the heart of the problem. And so over the last bit of time, I've been meeting with other cities, leadership from other cities that have problems and very visual problems with public drug use, including Eugene, Tigard, Portland, Beaverton. And I'm sure you're familiar with Portland's recent change in their ordinance. I think that was fairly well publicized. And so what we've been focusing on is how we could change that law for McMinnville. How could we make it that we do not have to tolerate public drug use? Because it does create real and perceived perceptions of safety, concerns around safety, and it is a real concern not only for our citizens but also for our enforcement teams. A change on how we do that enforcement will have to happen at the state, but that doesn't mean that we just have to wait for the state to do something. So with the work I've been doing, I am going to ask that the council bring this back as an agenda item, that we, and it will be up for council discussion, and it will be up to the council as a whole to give this direction to staff. But my proposal will be that we direct staff to prepare the ordinance so that we can then actively work with these other cities and the League of Oregon Cities, who's also engaged in a conversation around reforming Measure 110. and that we can be ready to go into action on day one. And we know the state is going to, the state knows they have to reform Measure 110. It isn't only McMinnville that it doesn't work for. So that is what I'm going to be asking to come back to council. It is also not straightforward. A change in that ordinance would also put, a change in that law, if they changed it the way we're suggesting, which is to restore home rule. If they changed that law, it would also create tremendous pressure on our municipal court. And so as we're moving through this, we also need to be thinking holistically so that we don't enact something that then we don't have the ability to fully process. And that direction and that approach is focusing at a real heart of this issue. And I'm on Marsh Lane, well, at least twice a week, at least once a week to fulfill my duties for water and light. I drive McDaniel every single morning. I'm highly aware of the issues there, and I see it, I live here. And I think if we can start arresting for public drug use, which is happening, we all know that's happening, it doesn't guarantee that those people will end up in a treatment situation by any means, but it does put them in a situation where it's available to them, and it gets the public drug use off our street. And it gets those who are knowingly and willingly violating our ordinances off the streets. So that's what I'm going to be asking the council to evaluate here over the coming weeks. It will take us some time to do the staff work behind that. We'll continue to work with the League of Oregon Cities and other cities as we ask for that, or as I hope that we go forward asking for that restoration around home rule. It is not a non-issue for the League of Oregon Cities to advocate for that. It is what they advocate for. And so that is my report on that. And I have one other report that I'm going to give today, and then I'm going to allow council to have some conversation. I know there's some councilors that wanted a little data from the chief specific to this. Actually, maybe we'll do that first, and then I'll come back and give the rest of my update, and then we'll go to other councilors. And Councilor Peralta, you had some specific questions for the chief?
I do. Thank you, Mayor. Chief Scales, thank you, and thank you for the people who came today. I just had a couple of questions because I think there's a lot of concern in the community about enforcement, particularly now. I mean, I can appreciate, Mayor, what you've said about the need to create an enforcement mechanism for drug use, and that's a great thing going forward. But I'm curious in terms of what we're doing now. So, Chief, in July, I think it was, of this year, or earlier in the year, we had approved a significant amount of funding to allow for the impounding of towed vehicles. This is to bring the city into compliance and allow us to tow illegally parked vehicles. We couldn't do that until we funded a tow lot per state law. Do you know roughly how many vehicles have been impounded in the 2 to 3 months since we've passed that law?
Well, it was actually it's probably been closer to a year now that we.
Oh, sorry, yeah.
That's okay. I would venture to guess we're in the area of, and when you say impound, it's abatement. It's the abatement of the campsite. The RV themselves is considered a campsite. I would say roughly 20 to 30 RVs.
And does that kind of, my recollection is the capacity that we had in the lot was about.
Yeah, so currently we do have capacity. We were getting to the point where we were full up, but we were able to have our private contractor come in and remove stuff from the tow lot, the storage lot, I should say. And so we've added capacity back then, but we can store anywhere up, I would imagine, of 10 to 15 RVs at a time. And then every once in a while, we'll have some vehicles or these bike pods that will end up getting abated as well in there.
Got it. The other question I had, we've gotten a lot of testimony written about safe school zones, and Kim Morris testified a little bit about that. I do know there's a couple of schools that have property lines that seem to run into areas where camping is legal, RV camping is legal, like Subuel's the one that I see most directly, because the whole south side of that school is in a commercial zone. If we were to pass a safe school ordinance, how would that affect the time to enforce that you have, the notice requirements and things like that?
That's a great question, because I think that's a bit of a misconception. I did read Kim Morris's report, I guess, public statement, that was contained in this most recent package, where she listed a number of cities. And there are cities that I'm sure have camping ordinances that prohibit it, but there's no way to get past the 72 hours of noticing on those. So you can have a 500-foot or a 500-yard, however you want to do it, but at the end of the day, the abatement is the abatement, and that is dictated by state statute, which says 72 hours is the minimum amount before you can abate it.
So like, in either case, if we had a person, it's hard to, I'd like to look at you while I'm talking to you. So in either case, let's say we have a person who's illegally who parks overnight, one night, in a commercial zone next to a school. The difference between passing the safe schools would be maybe a 24 hours for abatement, because one night might be legal, but...
No, it's 72 hours. If a car is parked illegally within or against the ordinance, 72 hours has to expire without it moving before it can be abated, right? So it doesn't matter if it's 48 hours or 24 hours, the code will not dictate how much time we have till we can abate it. It's 72 hours. That is the hard, fast rule under state statute.
Okay. Well, thank you, Chief. I appreciate that.
Any other questions or comments? Councilor Chenoweth?
Yeah, I'd love to ask a few questions since we've opened this can of worms. So when it comes to, recently we were having a problem down in the parks, Chief, and there were tons of trailers down there. What changed so that we no longer have all those trailers in the park?
That is a park rule that allows for immediate tow. It's not an abatement, it's a tow under park rule that our legal team looked at and said, we're not abating it. They can get it back. They can get it back. So there is no hold for an abatement. They can get it back quickly if they pay for the tow fee. That is the difference. That's a park rule that allowed for it to be moved out of there and stored.
So if I understand you correctly, we're not holding to the 72-hour state statute when it comes to trailers in the park?
We haven't had anybody. We have not had one trailer.
Okay, so candidly, they probably left because they saw the sign and they willingly left the park.
No, it's a different enforcement process. A tow is different than an abatement. An abatement is taking possession and not returning that possession.
I
we're not
understand the
allowed
difference
to tow, but we're not allowed to tow, Counselor. We're not allowed to tow a vehicle unless it's blocking a fire hydrant or in this more hyper-specialized area.
You don't need to talk down to me. I do understand the difference. But the reality was we didn't actually go in there and tow them. What they understood is they had to move. They were given notification, you need to leave here, it's no longer okay to be in the park. And they willingly left. We didn't have to remove them. And so I guess my point to this is when I look at what was presented to us from the McMinnville Community Task Force, the way I read it, and maybe there's a difference in understanding, I don't know, but the way I read it was that they were saying, look, this worked for the parks. And other cities, 23 cities throughout the state of Oregon have enacted a safe zone for children. what's the big deal of trying it and seeing if they will willingly, yes, they know, they understand there's a 72-hour requirement by the state. Yes, they know there's not going to be a change. But what does it hurt to say, to have an ordinance that's passed, then go to those trailers that are parked within the 72, within the safe zone and say, we have enacted a new safe zone, we're asking you to leave, because this is an area that is now protected for the children.
I don't mind taking that. So we did enact an ordinance. We enacted an ordinance 2 years ago that specifically excludes people from all of our residential zones, from all of our parks, and from our urban renewal area. We were ahead of all these other cities that are now rushing to get time, place, and manner restrictions in place. Now, there is another part of this conversation which is important, which there's been a lot of conversation of why don't you just change your ordinance? Well, I won't bore you with the length of time or the amount of taxpayer dollars that would do that, because you don't care, you want the result. The problem is that it won't produce the result you want. What it could produce, it won't produce the result you want because our enforcement on camping can't change. Sir, I'm glad you're here. We had a conversation less than 12 hours after Portland, and you asked me if we were going, no, behind you. You asked me if we were going to do something similar. I didn't see you before now, so I don't know if you were here to hear that. That is what I'm asking the council to do, is to evaluate targeting public drug use. But the other potential consequence that doesn't seem to quite be the severity of it doesn't seem to quite be landing, is that we have an ordinance that has had 3 legal reviews and is not found to be unconstitutional. These types of, the laws that try to exclude people from everywhere, which currently are only allowed in industrial and commercial zones, these types of laws that try to exclude people from everywhere have been found unconstitutional by the Ninth Circuit Court. Okay, so what? Maybe we should try it anyways, see what happens. So what happens if we do get a lawsuit? And certainly we've received plenty of emails, people already thinking our ordinance isn't legal. Well, if we do get a lawsuit and it is found to be unconstitutional, forget the fact that we don't have a city attorney or the budget to defend this lawsuit. If it's found to be unconstitutional, then our current ordinance goes away. Then we have no time, place, or manner restrictions. Then we have lawlessness.
Mayor?
Yes.
The other comment I think many people in the community are not aware of is we've lost lawsuits over enforcement. When I first came on the council 5 years ago, the police were doing abatements of our RVs at the time, and we lost a lawsuit in local circuit court. This is before the Boise decision, before the federal and courts made it more difficult to handle this enforcement, and before the state changed its laws to make enforcement more difficult for cities. So we've lost on these points, and that's one of the reasons why we are very cautious with the laws that we pass, because we have to comply with state law, we have to comply with federal law. And it's a challenge because, as the mayor pointed out, when we lose those decisions, then our entire framework, legal framework, gets thrown out. And the current legal framework, what we passed, bars people in parks, bars people in residential areas, allows for enforcement basically everywhere in the city, subject to our capacity. But we have consistently, as a council, tried to pass laws to give the police the tools that they need to deal with this really significant national problem. And the reality is, I'm glad Commissioner Johnson is here, because the reality is all of the federal dollars, all of the state dollars that come to deal with homelessness and housing, affordability, addiction, go to the county. They don't go to the city. The county gets the funds for the jail. The county gets the funds for health and human services. And we as a state are underfunding all of that. And on the city, and here in this city, on this dais, we're affected by it. We're all affected by it. All of us are frustrated with the people that we see out in the streets that aren't getting help because there's no state hospital to send them to, because there's not the resources to deal with mentally ill. It's maddening.
It's a human crisis. It's affecting the livability of our city. I don't like going for walks. I go for walks every day. It frustrates me too, all right? It's not just individual citizens that are frustrated. Every person on this dais is dealing with the same thing, but also hearing from every citizen about it, and also frustrated because we understand the different ways that our hands are tied as a community to deal with this problem. So I really thank you for coming out. I'm glad to talk to anybody individually if you want to talk personally about this. I care passionately about it. I've worked on it for 5 or 6 years. Every person on this council cares about this issue, cares about the effect that it's having on our community, on our state, and on our country.
With all due respect, I'm not done. So I'd like to finish what I was saying. I got cut off twice, and I'd like to finish.
All right, okay, gentlemen. I know this is a passionate, everybody is passionate about this, and we will maintain order. Thank you.
So here's the thing. 23 cities have enacted this. That means there have been 23 likely legal reviews to verify that this passes legal muster, that we didn't have to pay for. This particular request is not something that was not vetted. The city of Portland passed this thing. This is, and that was done by pretty much by executive decision. To argue that this is not going to pass legal muster doesn't fly with me, number one. Number two, the reality is the request, and this is what's frustrating me and why I'm worked up about it. I deal with the homeless problem on my business probably at least every other week now. Last week, again, I had issues going on in my parking lot creating problems, okay? That part of this isn't what's bothering me. What's bothering me is that we've got to come to this before we have a dialogue where these folks know where we're coming from. That's what's bothering me. And I feel like the request was to put something in place that might scare them to react willingly. It wasn't to put something in place that was an added enforcement, because the enforcement mechanisms, as have been so eloquently described, are already predetermined by the state, and there's nothing we can do about that. They understood that. At least that's the way I read it. So the request was not to say, let's create another stick, and the request was not to block all of McMinnville. It was to say a certain number of feet around schools. If 1,500 feet's too far, maybe we come back with 1,000, maybe we come back with 500, whatever the case may be. But the request was to come up with a solution that could move folks that are dangerous to children away from the children.
Thank you, Counselor. Respectfully, that is... Thank you. Respectfully, that is what I want to bring to the council, is a proposal that can target a problem where we can make a significant change by actually being able to respond in real time when people are violating a moral law. And I think for most of us, most likely all of us, the public drug use that is allowed and permitted by Measure 110 is a moral violation of our laws. And as it overlays with these problem areas, it will give us a tool to enforce.
Can I say one more kind thing?
Sure.
I would like to thank you for giving the opportunity for this discussion to take place. I'd like to thank you for taking on Measure 110. Those are two great things that you have done, and I want to vocally say that I appreciate the effort. Thank you.
Thank you, Counselor. Thank you. No applause necessary. Thank you. You all applaud a lot. We try to limit applause and boos in here so we can keep to the business of the council. I am going to go on with my council updates at this point, and then I am going to go to the rest of the council. We do hope you stay and hear everything else. On the larger housing front, we were able to host Andrea Bell, the Executive Director of Oregon Housing and Community Services, about 2 weeks ago. We invited Health and Human Services, the Housing Authority of Yamhill County, many of our partners, YCAP, and we did an incredible tour of our navigation center, Stratus Village, and the Aspire development, where the state has already invested. And we talked specifically about what some of our roadblocks are at the state for being able to bring more housing online in a faster way. And it's a big deal because getting the audience of a state director who has a tremendous budget to control, understanding the nuances of what especially affects rural communities is very important. It was a really productive meeting. And we also recently hosted the executive director of Children's Institute, and the follow-up from that has not only been where we had the school district and Parks and Rec and Head Start and Campfire, amongst others, was the immediate discovery of 45 scholarshiped positions into our after-school programming. But then beyond that, Children's Institute has come back because they are working with Business Oregon, and they want to be investing in housing projects that are coming online where they can specifically invest in childcare at those areas. That's significant because Children's Institute has a $1 billion budget to invest. So bringing those dollars here and addressing two of our great needs is, I think, a win-win. And then lastly, in my reports tonight, we are doing council assignments. So we did some reassignments based on both requests I had for movement, but also because of a lot of other things that have happened. So Councilor Payne, you all will remain on the Audit Committee, the Landscape Review Committee, and the Public Safety Coordinating Council. Councilor Peralta, you will remain on the County Emergency Council and the Council of Governments, and added to your council assignments will be MCM, McMinnville Community Media. Interested to see what happens with those PEG funds now. Councilor Chenoweth, you will be on, you'll remain on the Economic Vitality Leadership Council and the Parkway Committee, and then I am adding to your council assignments the Historic Landmarks Committee. Councilor Menke, you will remain on the Audit Committee, the chair of the McMinnville Affordable Housing Commission, and the Parkway Committee. And Councilor Geary, you will remain on the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Advisory Committee, the McMinnville Urban Renewal Advisory Committee, and then you will be added to the McMinnville Affordable Housing Commission. And we do have a one-year council position focused on our stormwater work with Public Works, and you will be assigned to that as well. And Council President, you will retain your positions on YCOM, Visit McMinnville, and the Airport Commission. So thank you all for your service and this additional service. These are volunteers in front of you who not only show up to these council meetings and prepare for them, but also a lot of other meetings and carry a lot of other weight. So I apologize for making our meeting much longer this evening, but agree there was, I think it was a good opportunity tonight to get some information out as well as in. And since we're going out of order, Council President, do you mind if I go to you next?
Sounds good. So I'm guessing some of you read Friday's paper, which talked a little bit about fire extinguisher needs out at the airport. We're currently still exploring that. The decision hasn't been landed on by the McMinnville Fire District Fire Marshal. He's still talking to the state about that. So I think the number quoted in that paper was a little premature, and so as we land on that, I'll bring a more formal report back on that. But I just wanted to let you guys all know that currently we haven't landed on a number, and currently we haven't landed on the official need for those out there yet. So we're still dotting I's and crossing T's on that front. We'll have a fire district meeting Thursday at 6 o'clock at Station 1, as well as next Thursday and the Thursday after, which will be our current fire chief's final fire district meeting before his retirement at the end of this month. As far as YCOM goes, I had a scheduling conflict today. They did meet, but I'm going to reach out to Executive Director Sowers for a brief on that. And Visit McMinnville will meet tomorrow. And Airport Commission, we have the air show at the end of this month. So if you haven't bought your tickets, or if you have any animals or kids that are startled by loud noises, I would start making plans for them, whether that's melatonin, earplugs, or whatever they do in the equestrian world. Make sure you're prepared by the end of the month. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Geary.
Thank you. MURAC had no formal meeting, and we received a quick update on a couple of things going on. And the Diversity, Equity, Inclusion Advisory Council will be meeting Thursday, and a bulk of that time will be spent on the engagement process and engagement check-in for the Parks and Recreation Open Space Master Plan. So it's a good meaty issue coming up. Other than that, that's all.
Thank you. Councilor Chenoweth.
I think I've said enough. I have nothing to report.
Thank you, sir. Councilor Peralta.
Thank you, Mayor. Council governments, the quarterly meeting is coming up later this month. We have, I will be sending an invitation to a legislative meeting, a breakfast that the COG is going to be hosting at the end of the month for all of the state and federal delegations. So I'd like to invite my colleagues to join me, and I'll send you the details on that. I don't have them in hand right now. The legislative committee at the COG recommended pushing to reset property values at sale in the upcoming legislative session. So that's to stabilize local government taxes around the state. And they're also recommending that the COG establish rules to service jurisdictions outside of Marion, Polk, and Yamhill and the Confederated Tribes. That was required by the state because we took in a lot of money for economic development, and they wanted somebody to serve additional jurisdictions because not every jurisdiction in Oregon is covered by a voluntary or mandatory government cooperative entity. So that's my report.
Thank you. Councilor Payne.
Thank you. I don't have anything to report on landscape reviews. Next meeting, they meet, or last meeting, excuse me, their next meeting is September 20th, and the Yamhill County Local Public Safety Coordinating Council, also known as LIPSIC, reviewed the Department of Corrections biennial plan for 2023 to 2025, and then they approved the grant application for the Justice Reinvestment Program.
Thank you. Councilor Mankey.
Affordable housing, we met last month, at the end of the month, and we were discussing one of the two goals we picked for this last year, which is density bonuses, and also the other one is a community land trust. We discussed density bonuses. With the changes to state law and zoning ordinance in recent years, most McMinnville residential zones, commercial zones, which also allow as residential uses, no longer have density maximums, except for townhouses. So it would seem that this might make density bonuses moot. However, we have determined that there are some additional things we can look at: minimum lot size and small lot sizes, density bonuses for the R5 zone, which has a minimum density of 1,500 square foot lots, revised permitting uses for additional dwellings in R1, R2, and R3 zones, and transfer of density development for that's part of the natural hazards planning work. This will take a couple more months for the staff to develop, so they will be presenting to us that information at that time.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So does that basically, you lower the costs for like SDCs or something in higher density zones? Is that what you're?
Well, the concept was originally that, yeah, we could incentivize by saying you can have more density here, so you can build more houses here, and it would cost you less and things like that. But the problem is that the state has come down and basically taken away a lot of this, the impact of these particular laws. So now there are some other things that we're looking at that would hopefully improve and give us some additional incentives using a similar idea.
Thank you.
But thanks for asking. In addition to that, the YCAP met and the executive committee met, and we interviewed 2 candidates. We had a strong recommendation for one particular candidate. I can't announce them because I don't know yet. The board has not formally voted on that individual. So next time we meet, we will talk about that. And then there is another Fox Ridge PAC meeting coming up, I think within a week or so, and it will be a public meeting, I think, or they'll be soliciting for more information, so keep an eye out for that.
Thank you, councilors. We'll now go to department heads.
Mayor Drabkin?
Yes.
If I may, on the MIRAC one, I had smoothed over the couple of bullet points I had because I lost the screen, but I was able to pull the screen back in.
Oh, please, Councilor Gary.
We got a written update from MIRAC despite not having a meeting. So the updates we received were the Northwest Rubber site acquisition, the environmental due diligence is still underway. The EV charging stations for down there, there's a team working on due diligence still for putting those in. We have are underway on a discussion about increased parking inventory, and the MDA and their board has agreed to join us in that discussion, so that'll be moving forward. And then the 3rd Street Improvement Project Advisory Committee, which MIRAC's on and will be part of, is getting started. So those are the efforts underway on MIRAC.
Thank you, Councilor. City Manager Jeff Towery.
Thank you, Mayor. Today we conducted an interview process for a city attorney position. That process will continue tomorrow, and I'll have more information to report back to you soon.
Thank you. Interim City Attorney Walt Gowell.
Nothing to report other than I'm thrilled.
Chief of Police Nat Scales.
Walt, you cracked me up. A couple of things real quick. I haven't been to last couple city council meetings. Just giving you an update. Obviously, with the sergeant's promotions, we are now promoting corporals since 3 corporal positions were taken by the new sergeant. So excited about that. We've got our sergeants doing that process. Another hiring, I know hiring is on everybody's minds with the police department. Currently, 1 at the academy. We have 3 in backgrounds, 2 additionals that we're probably going to give backgrounds to, and then ultimately we've got another pool of interviews that we'll be scheduling in the next couple of weeks. So pretty robust pool right now comparatively to what we've seen in the past. I'd like to acknowledge some work that Captain Simons did. We were issued or given federal grant money for body-worn cameras. So we'll be getting those online in the next 3 to 4 months. We're looking eagerly with Scott Burke's team to get those online and get our folks trained up on that. So they will be Axon body-worn cameras, something that is industry standard, sort of. Lastly, a couple things. Councilor Garvin mentioned air show. We have our last pre-op meeting, I believe, Thursday. And then Cruising Mac was a success. We didn't have any major issues with Cruising McMinnville. Lastly, I'd like to touch on a couple things that you had mentioned. Took part in a couple, whether it was a League of Oregon Cities meeting. I'm cautiously optimistic after attending some other meetings through OACP, the Oregon Chiefs Association, with this reform of 110. And I want to thank you for leaning into that, because it's not a small problem to lean into when you've got a state that has hamstrung their cities and how to deal with issues within their neighborhoods and cities. So thank you to that. You're to be commended, because that's not an enviable position to be in sometimes. So with that being said, I will be quiet. And I'd like to also say, hey, to the citizens that are in the gallery, I hear your calls, whether it's phone calls, whether it's emails. This is not something that the police department has put on the back burner. This is an issue that we see. I can tell you, of the hundreds of chiefs that I'm chiefs with, every single city that I work with, every chief I talk to deals with the exact same thing our city's dealing with. And I'm not saying that just to sort of gloss over like everybody's dealing with it. It's a societal issue. 4 years ago, I would have thought that we could arrest our way out of this. It is not going to happen. I've come to the conclusion that it's going to take a system-wide approach because there are some that just don't want to comply with ordinances. So I think we have to come to terms with that, and I think we need to work with our private and county partners. So I'm going to get off my soapbox, but I do want to say thank you for leaning into 110 because it is a major issue, and I think we've got a route forward.
Thank you. And Director Pagano.
Thank you. I just wanted to mention, next week we are holding interviews for the Emergency Management Coordinator. We had a really good response to that advertisement for that position. It's a ARPA-funded, half-time position, funded for 3 years. So we're really looking forward to speaking with those applicants.
Thank you. City Recorder Claudia Cisneros.
Nothing for the council. Thank you.
Thank you. And Scott Burke, IT Director.
Yeah, nothing for the council tonight. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Finance Director Jennifer Cuellar, do you have anything you'd like to join us for? Okay, my computer lost its charge. I think we have Community Development Director Richards on Zoom. Is that accurate? Thank you.
Yes, good evening. I just had a couple of things I wanted to share. The city is working with a bank to leverage about $225,000 that we received as a grant a couple of years ago to assist our business community. We're working with the bank to give out forgivable loans for businesses in need. So I want to make sure we get the word out to people. There is an application process, but if anybody's interested in exploring that further, please feel free to call the Community Development Department. We also just received word from the State Department of Land Conservation and Development that the City of McMinnville is receiving 2 grants for helping us with our housing planning. This is to do land use efficiencies and our housing production strategy that's required for McMinnville to do next year, but they are providing grant funds to help us with that work. And then lastly, the city is hosting the regional strategies team next week here in McMinnville. What that means is that staff from all the state agencies will gather with our city staff and talk about city projects and needs. And it's a great opportunity to, one, create relationships with these state agencies and also to get our projects and needs on their radar screen. So we're excited to host them. We're one of the first cities to host the newly constituted regional strategies team. So we will report more on that afterwards. Thank you.
Thank you. And do we have Parks and Rec Director Muir on Zoom? No. Do we have any other ETs on Zoom? Okay. Thank you. We'll now move into the business portion of our meeting. We'll start with our consent agenda. Does any counselor wish to have anything? I'm sorry. Has every counselor had an opportunity to review the May 2023 cash and investment report that was in your packet? And are there any questions? Great. Has every counselor had an opportunity to review the consent agenda? And is there anything you wish to have called off the consent agenda for discussion at this time? Not seeing anybody, I would ask for a motion to approve the consent agenda as presented. I have a motion from Councilor Menke to approve the consent agenda as presented. May I have a second?
Second.
I have a second from Councilor Payne. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
And opposed, say nay. And the consent agenda passes unanimously. We'll now move into our ordinances. We're going to consider the first reading with a possible second reading of ordinance number 5138. Does any counselor need to declare an actual or potential conflict of interest or recuse themselves from this ordinance? Great. Interim City Attorney Welko, will you please read the ordinance by title only?
Ordinance number 5138, an ordinance repealing Chapter 9.20.30, Chapter 9.32.20, and Chapter 9.24.20 of the McMinnville Municipal Code and amending Chapter 9.24.40 of the McMinnville Municipal Code.
Thank you, and I would call again on our Chief of Police, Matt Scales, to present.
I feel like I've taken all of tonight. Would you like me to do it from the front
You're fine, wherever you're comfortable, sir.
Thank you, Mayor and City Council. I direct you to the staff report that I prepared with Walt Gal, our interim city attorney. During the past 6 months, there's been multiple discussions with respect to McMinnville Municipal Code sections that on the surface appeared to be unconstitutional. And within the last couple of months, Mr. Gal and myself have met several times, either by phone, email, what have you, and identified 3 municipal codes which are very likely unconstitutional and unenforceable in whole or in part under current binding law. We also identified McMinnville Municipal Code 9.2 relating to public indecency as needing amendment to be enforceable as written. The proposed amendments remove outdated language and tracks with existing Oregon statutory public indecency category set out in ORS 163465. I'd refer you to the packet where we can go over the individual municipal codes if you'd like.
I don't, does any counselor have any questions on the codes? And if not, then we'll move forward.
I do. What
Councilor
was,
Chenoweth?
based on what did we determine that these are unenforceable and unconstitutional?
There's a number of different cases in various jurisdictions, including Oregon. For instance, the accosting for deviant purposes was held to be unconstitutional in state law. The analogous statute that repeats the same standard was found unconstitutional in 1981 as a violation of free speech on the basis that acts that were lawful in private could not be solicited in public, and that was found to be a violation of free speech. I believe that subsequent cases have attacked it on due process and equal protection grounds. The city has not attempted to use it for enforcement purposes since, well, at least not since I've been practicing or been aware of. These were adopted about 50 years ago, in 1972, all 3 of these ordinances. The anti-begging ordinance could be revised and made constitutional. Right now, it has no standard that says where you can't ask for alms, okay? And the cases upholding anti-begging statutes have upheld them where the begging creates a public danger, such as on a freeway entrance, is an example. However, outside Safeway ringing a bell at Christmas is almost certainly unconstitutional to enforce this ordinance against that activity. And the city has not attempted to. So the goal here was to try and wash out of your code unused sections that are probably unenforceable if challenged, and to amend the public indecency ordinance to bring it into compliance with existing state the existing state code, which has been found to be enforceable, and include in it something that was not included in it before, which is the inclusion of public masturbation as a part of the public indecency ordinance. That was not there before.
Now, it seems to me cities around here recently have put in place anti-panhandling laws. And I'm lapsing in memory on which one it was. I want to say it was Corvallis, but I don't put that on the record because I don't know for sure. So that's why I'm a little perplexed why we're pulling this at this time, and I also don't understand the analogy to the bell ringing at Christmas time, because that's clearly not the target of the ordinance.
However, the ordinance doesn't distinguish between the 2 different acts.
Okay. So wouldn't we be better served than to fix it rather than to remove it?
And as I said, that's one option that the council has if it wants to incorporate into the anti-begging ordinance time, place, and manner restrictions, then you could do that, and this ordinance could be upheld if the council wishes to save it. In its current form, it's likely, very likely, in my view, unenforceable. But yes, it could be modified. It wouldn't necessarily have to be repealed in order to make it constitutional.
And the ordinance that's before us is to repeal all three and make a change to another.
Correct.
Okay, yeah, I can't be in favor of that. Thank you.
Any other comments or questions? Okay. I would now ask for a motion to pass ordinance number 5138 to a second reading.
So moved.
I have a motion from Councilor Menke. Ask for a second.
Second.
I have a second from Council President Garvin. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
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 And those opposed, say nay.
Nay.
Ordinance number 5138 passes by a vote of 5-1 on its first reading and will be brought back for a second reading on September 26th. Thank you very much. And I will now adjourn the City Council meeting at 8:15 p.m. and we will move into executive session. Thank you all for coming.
Mayor, can you give the citation on the executive session for the record, please?
Yes, sir. This executive session will be pursuant to ORS 192.660 sub 2 sub E to conduct deliberations and with persons designated by the governing body to negotiate real property transactions. And this executive session is pursuant to ORS 192.660 sub 2 sub F to consider information on records that are exempt by law from public inspection.
Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you.